the listeners, this moment is very special because this is Vikram session, and this is finally Vikram session in the Pondy Lit Fest. So, Vikram, I will not ask you how you made the shortlist of the heroes in your book, because you have the right to make the shortlist, and I will not question it. But I will still ask you as to why you wrote the book.
Thank you, Alo. A very good evening to everyone. I almost have the onerous task of being both the opening batsman and the closing batsman of this wonderful T20 match that Alo and her team has put together. And the second onerous task is to continue after someone like Meenakshi ji. That makes it all the more difficult. For me personally, I forgot to mention in the morning, the long connection with Pondicherry, Puducherry, dates back to my school times, because I studied in the Sri Aurobindo Memorial School in Bangalore, run by members of the ashram, Srimati Hero Vashishta and her sister Aditi Vashishta and so on, who ran the school there. So every in growing up years, visit to the ashram here, to Matru Mandir, to all the places here was very much part of our growing up years. And today, like my good friend Anand mentioned, there were 25 cities all over India, and this happens to be the culmination. So it's all the more special that it's happening in a place which has been so close to my heart. And it gives me an opportunity to also, and after this I'm not going to talk about Bravehearts of Bharat anymore. Hopefully people have read and heard all that I have to say about this. It's a great feeling to actually dedicate this book and the idea behind this book to the great Maharshi, whose grace is right behind all of us here. And so I thought it's best to open with, in fact, even the book starts with a prologue, which is that stanza of our national song, the Vande Mataram, which is not invoked usually, and that too has a Pondicherry connection, because this stanza that I've included in the book is a translation by Sri Aurobindo of the original by Bankim Chandra. And this, of course, I'm sure all of you know these verses. Koti koti kantha kala kala ninad karale, koti koti bhujay dhrita khara kara vale, abala kanoma eto bole, bahu bala dharanim namami taranim, ripudala varanim mataram vande mataram. And we actually sang this in the Sri Aurobindo Memorial School too, in the very, distinct ashram tune that Mohan Bhai and others here, had tuned this and made us sing. And Sri Aurobindo himself translates these verses thus, and I quote, "Who hath said that thou art weak in thy lands, when the sword flesh out in the 70 million hands, and 70 million voices roar thy dreadful name from shore to shore. With many strengths who art mighty and stored, to thee I call, O Mother and Lord. Thou who savest, arise and save. To her I cry, whoever her foe man drove, back from plain and sea, and shook herself free." So this Kshatra spirit, so to say, Meenakshi ji mentioned that it was a miracle that we survived. I think one of the factors why we survived was also the fact that we put up a lot of resistance. It was civilizational resistance, but it was also physical resistance and prowess, and military conquest where we won to, which, as she mentioned, the particular species of historians have almost made us feel that we have been a land of losers. Right from our earliest inhabitants, the myth of the Aryan invasion, down to the English East India Company, we have been a nation and a civilization which has only been cowering, in front of invaders, and we really did not put up that fight at all, which is again an ahistorical myth, because if we are around as the only pre-Bronze Age civilization today, alive and kicking, there must have been some resistance that we put to, some wars that we won also. Some heroes and heroines and warriors and people, common people, who in addition to contributing to the civilization, as she rightly mentioned, also put up a physical, defense against whoever invaded us. But those stories and those aspects of our past in this larger narrative of pacifism, particularly in the 20th century, in the history of our freedom movement itself, that as Nandini ji also mentioned in the morning, that we need to show that we won even something like our political freedom through a very peaceful and non-violent method. That there was no kshatriya element there was no violence, there was no bloodshed and armed struggle. That somehow is sought to give us some kind of brownie points in some mythical world, which it doesn't. But then we have been made to believe that, and in the process, I think the emasculation of our society, of our as I said, that whole spirit, warrior spirit, which we've never been the first land of offense. But then protecting oneself, as Arvindanji also mentioned, the force that resists and ring fences itself against all kinds of predatory forces, those names have somehow been completely missed from our historical consciousness, our memories, and so on. So this book, Bravehearts of Bharat, documents 15 such warriors, and for me, importantly, it was also important that the history of India should not just be his story, where her story also needs to find a place. And in fact, I was very keen to include Rani Durgavati in the list, and I was actually scampering for documents and data, and I was so astonished by the amount of research that she had put together and to bring this story of Durgavati. So out of the 15 people, 7 happen to be women and 8 are men. And the other biggest problem which I always think, and the way the narrative of Bharat itself is that this highly Delhi-centric narrative of everything in this country, whether it is the media, whether it is history, anything. At this rate, I might not even be allowed to enter Delhi. The amount of bad mouthing I do for Delhi all over those 25 cities I go all around. It's a beautiful place and I like it. But then it's just that it gets incommensurate importance by virtue of being the political capital and the capital of importance. Large parts of India can be under floods. Our southern part of India and all its problems seldom feature in the national mainstream media also. Whereas, some MCD elections in Delhi, that becomes national news. Some two fellows fighting with each other in that wonderful university that Anand, teaches in. That becomes the story of India, and that all, the idea of India is under threat and all that. Whereas there are 800 other universities where people are peacefully studying. But then, that is the problem. So similarly in history as well, we've all been forced to learn by rote, all the succession lines of Lodhis and Khiljis and Tughlaqs and all these characters whose, I think, our contribution to the civilization, barring few structures here and there, would be next to zilch. They were all largely marauders and barbarians, but we would be forced to learn about them. But then southern India, the Cholas, who ruled for close to 1,000 years, other than Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, if you ask the rest of India, and that too maybe only after Ponniyin Selvan, that people know that outside the periphery of South India know that there was a dynasty like this, beyond whatever little is taught to us. If we ask them to name a couple of Chola kings, it will be very difficult for a young person to do that. Similarly, the northeast of India, it's a complete black hole. The Ahoms of the Northeast ruled for 600 years. But even among the audience, can we name two Ahom kings who come readily to mind? Anybody? No, so I prove my point there. So for 600 years they ruled, but then we don't know about them. But then an Ibrahim Lodi, Chakradhwaj Singha and Jayadhwaj Singha. So, and they were the, but then we'll know all these Ibrahim Lodi, we'll know Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, all these names, Muhammad bin Qasim, Meenakshi ji spoke about. We all would have heard about the invasion of Sindh and when it happened. but the resistance that was given to them by Raja Dahar of Sindh and his predecessor Chacha, who established the dynasty, all of it beautifully documented in the Chachnama. Those things will never be told to us. That right from 636 CE or so on, there were invasions on Sindh. It took them 70 years to occupy, finally in 710 when Qasim came. So many years, all the repulsions that were done of the invasions, that story is not told to us. The long litany, a laundry list of wars that we as India and Indians only lost. Battles of Panipat, Battle of Buxar, Plassey, Anglo-Mysore, Anglo-Maratha, Anglo-Sikh, all of them are just wars that we lost. So while, I'm not making a case that we need to be jingoistic and beat our chests and say all the kind of things that a lot of loony elements also do. I think this sense of genuine pride that we kept ourselves alive through physical prowess also, in addition to the civilizational strength that this nation has, I think that was very important to encapsulate. And you can do that only through, in my case, I love to see biography as a window to the history of the times. How through the lives of these 15 people, it's not just their stories, but through their lives, it opens a window to that era in which they lived. What were the other contemporary forces at that time? How did they interact? And in that milieu, how did these people make their mark? So the 15 other people, I'll just list their names at least so that rings a bell for most of us. Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir. The book starts with his story. Someone who was called the second Alexander and the second Samudragupta, who ensured, along with several other alliances that were done, Bappa Raval, Nagabhatta, Pulakeshin, and so on, to keep the Arabs at bay. It took the Arabs and the Turks about 500 years to establish the first Islamic Sultanate in India with the Delhi Sultanate after the Arab invasion of Sindh. So for 500 years, there was a pushback. There was constant resistance which didn't allow these characters, even Muhammad Ghazni and others didn't get a free pass. We'll talk more about that later. So Lalitaditya's story talks about this, and in the process brings Dahar and Chacha and also Yashovarman of Kannauj, who was his foe, but then they joined hands against the Arabs. Then we come down south to this part of the country where Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, who took the sphere of influence. One is of Gangaikonda Cholapuram, to go all the way up to the banks of the Ganga and then bring the water from there, and also outside the subcontinent as we know it today, to Sri Lanka, to Maldives, to Sri Vijaya in the Malay Peninsula. The third person whom I cover is Naiki Devi of Gujarat, a Chalukyan ruler who in 1178 in the Battle of Kasarhada actually defeats Muhammad Ghori. And Muhammad Ghori is so humiliated that he is defeated by a woman that he never turns towards Gujarat again. Several decades later, it's up to Aibak, his slave, to actually defeat and capture Gujarat. And then by then, the Chalukya dynasty has broken off into the Vaghela branch. Then you have Rudramma Devi of Warangal, who, again, we can talk more about the women in detail, who was, fighting constantly, even died in battle at the age of 80, against incursions both within and without of her kingdom. Rana Kumbha of Mewar, who was an unvanquished ruler. He never lost any war all his life. And he built what is probably the second longest wall in the world after the Great Wall of China, the Kumbhalgarh Fort, which I don't know, we would probably not even visit, not even commemorate this man. Then again, Rani Abbakka Chautha of Ullal in Karnataka, who defeated the Portuguese. Portuguese, and we'll talk again more about that when you get into the stories of some of these women. Chand Bibi of Ahmednagar. Again, the risk of making it a binary of Hindu versus Muslim and so on is very rife. So Chand Bibi, the Deccan Sultanates, and the kind of resistance they put against the Mughals. And it needed Akbar to come all the way himself after his son could not vanquish Chand Bibi. And finally Chand Bibi had to be killed by deceit by a eunuch in her court by Akbar's army spreading some rumors against her. Then we have Kanhoji Angre, the Maratha Sarkhel, or the naval commander who constantly kept the Konkan fort, the western coast, protected against the Portuguese, the English East India Company, and also the Siddhis who were ruling there. Then I forget. We have Banda Singh Bahadur, who established India's, the first Sikh state. Again, a very, very fascinating story of this man who was a Hindu, who became a mystic, and then comes under the spell of Guru Gobind Singh and becomes his Banda, or disciple, and then takes revenge for all the atrocities that Aurangzeb commits, particularly against the Sahibzadas. We recently celebrated or commemorated the Veer Balak Divas, so for the two Sahibzadas, Fateh Singh and Zorawar Singh. Their killers were avenged by Banda Singh Bahadur, Wazir Khan of Sirhind, and Marthanda Varma in Kerala, someone who defeats the Dutch East India Company in the Battle of Kolachal. By then, the Dutch East India Company has spread into one of the most, widespread global powers, being the first ever company to be listed on a global stock exchange. Their sphere of influence extending from South Africa, moving all the way through Asia, southern India, Bengal, and also to Japan and Maldives. So today, he defeated them in the Battle of Kolachal in 1741, and if he had not done that, maybe we would all be talking today in Dutch. Because their idea of colonizing India was very much, paramount on their minds. But this defeat ensured that the Dutch collapsed. Even as a global, their stocks fell in the global market. Their pepper trade and spice trade suffered immensely from the Malabar coast. And after that, you don't hear much about the Dutch in Indian history. In any other country, you would have Marthanda Varma statues, I think, in every street corner, and people would have celebrated him. But other than maybe Kerala and maybe border districts here and there, Kanyakumari and so on, people don't know much about this man. Similarly, the Northeast, Lachit Barphukan of Assam, Army General of the Ahom rulers, Chakradhwaj and Jayadhwaj Singha, who defeats the largest imperial army of Aurangzeb, sent under Raja Ram Singh of Jaipur, in what is known as the Battle of Saraighat. So we already have three battles that have spoken about: Battle of Kasarhada, Battle of Kolachal, Battle of Saraighat, where there have also been documented victories, among several others that are there in the book. A few others are there, like Rajashri Bhagya Chandra Jai Singh of Manipur, again, very little. Ahilyabai Holkar of Indore, and Velu Nachiyar from Shivganga. And the book ends with Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh, who was the face of resistance in Lucknow. And Lucknow was the last bastion when most of the other regions had fallen to the British might in the Great Revolt. It was Lucknow which was the last bastion which survived. And there also it was important to bring people like this, because during her time, there was a Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah who was looking at the entire thing as a jihad, as specifically an Islamic conquest against all infidels, whether it was a Hindu or the British. Whereas this lady was someone who was trying to put all of them into the fold, including her most of her army were actually Hindus. The women corps that she created was largely led by Dalits, including this lady called Uda Devi Pasi, who was a part of the army, who was killed by the British. So these 15 stories, very, very disparate, but I think linked with that common thread of a civilizational resistance, a civilizational upsurge. Probably one of the many reasons why we are still around today as a civilization. So, very long answer to your short question.
That's how it's going to be for the rest of the hour. So, if you followed the sequence, you would have understood that while it makes sense to, because they're all vertical biographies, you can read them, but reading them from first to last makes chronological sense. So, I would recommend everybody to go starting from Lalita Aditya and ending with the last one, because it really gives you such a vast, wonderful canvas of the time from from the very first Mughal Arab invasion with Lalita Di. He's way more than that up to this point. Now I will ask you the question about women. Now, if you take the same era in Europe, I just wanted to make this comparison because I was teaching the Middle Ages in class. And from, say, the 800s up to 1857, we know that in the Middle Ages they had nothing. The Renaissance, they were very, you can't even name a painter, maybe one or two. The Enlightenment, they were seriously kept out of the process. In the Industrial Revolution, I can't think of too many women. But that's not the case with India at all. And today we are being sermoned about feminism. So can you touch upon the lives of the women? They were widows, they were ladies who had to dress like men, they were ladies who defied the times, incredible courage. So can you just you the gaze of women, or the way the women lived, especially women of power, touch upon these biographies and discuss this point.
Yeah. Oh my God, that will be an entire session in itself. But very briefly, one point that I'd like to add, Alo, to what you said, the chronology. So it's, for me, this book is the history of India seen through the eyes of these people, where all these dynasties make an appearance. I do not, subscribe to this notion that somebody should be excised from our history. In the state I come from, Karnataka, there is this constant political tussle that, Tipu Sultan should not find a place in the history of the textbooks, and all, which I think is a foolish argument by right-wing groups, because you cannot wish away your history. If you don't like Tipu Sultan, that's your problem. He was very much a part of the history of Karnataka and Mysore, and it's up to the pedagogy to include all of the good, bad, the ugly elements of everybody who ruled us. Now, how much do you make them the center of attention? That is where I think the difference comes. So here, Lodhis, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Mughals, all of them come and go. But the spotlight is not on them. The spotlight is on the people we need to celebrate. The history of India need not be the history of the invaders and invasions, but we can turn the light on to someone else, and then you get a completely different narrative. Those people become peripheral characters rather than what we have in our books as regional histories. Now, who are we to say the Cholas are regional and the Lodhis and Khiljis are national? What is national? What is mainstream? What is regional? So I think all these questions beg for an answer, which everyone is as important. The Ahoms are as national as the Mughals, and so on. Now, about the women, each of these 7 people, which was a very tough task to choose, and one among them is not a traditional warrior, Ahilya Bai Holkar, who didn't, of course, briefly she tried to resist the Peshwa, Raghoba, Peshwa's uncle, from taking over because he realized that a woman had, taken on the throne of Indore after the death of the father-in-law, Malhar Rao. But beyond that, she didn't actually wage a war. But I think her inclusion was very important as a civilizational warrior, and we'll probably touch upon that. But all the others were fighter women, whether it was Rudrama Devi, who, as I mentioned, and we keep having this discussion along with feminism also about patriarchy. I think in India, it is very, very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all definition for any concept. You have elements of both, and I'll just elaborate that. Rudrama Devi from the Kakatiya, kingdom, her father Ganpati Deva, he doesn't have a male heir, and he does what is known as the Putrika Yajna, which is to anoint the daughter as the successor, legitimate successor. And he does something very interesting, that he hides the gender of the daughter. She's sent away as a small child into hiding with some of these, the nobles and warriors, to train her right from childhood in military warfare. And much later, when she comes of age, when her gender can no longer be hidden, that's when she's announced to the rest of the kingdom. And father and daughter together sit on the throne and rule for a couple of years, and then the father dies and she takes over as the successor. And since then, as I said, from the day she becomes the ruler till the day of her death at the age of 80, there is constant fight. So there is a father who's also giving this opportunity to the daughter in the patriarchal setup that we talk of. And that continues several centuries later, where even Velu Nachiyar, her father in the Ramnathapuram and Shivganga, the two principalities that she's born in and then married to, there also her father trains her in all the elements of warfare, the acrobatics and everything that she is taught. And that is why she becomes such an important bulwark against the East India Company, the first woman to fight a war against the East India Company and also to regain the kingdom of Shivaganga from them and the Arcot Nawab. Ahilyabai Holkar, again, very, very fascinating story where, she's, her father-in-law, Malhar Rao Holkar, he's transiting from one place to the other. He's spending a night somewhere. And then there he, in the host's house, he finds this young girl who's very, very intelligent and well-mannered. And he is immediately, taken in by her. And he asks for her hand in marriage for his son, Khande Rao. And she's married and he's brought back to Indore as the daughter-in-law. And Malhar Rao Holkar ensures the education of his daughter-in-law. Again, you have a father-in-law who's ensuring the education of the daughter-in-law. She's trained in finance, in administration, and the son is a little delinquent. He has multiple, dalliances, affairs, and so the daughter-in-law becomes the main support for the father-in-law, and he's constantly communicating with her, even when he's at the third battle of Panipat, so giving her valuable information about geopolitics, about statecraft and all of that. And when Khande Rao dies and all the other wives, they commit sati, this lady is asked not to. You have been the source of support. If you also commit sati, then what will happen to me? And she agrees, and she becomes the successor to Malhar Rao after he dies. So we have examples like this where where fathers have ensured that the daughters are either successors or trained in warfare and physical activity, or even given intellectual, training like Malhar Rao is done. But at the same time, you also have a lot of examples, including in this book and otherwise, where, I found this very, very alarming that the insinuations and the, chronicles that are done for a woman ruler, it was so difficult for a woman to be in power, that right from Rani Didda of Kashmir, or Abbaka also, or even someone as pious as Ahilyabai, the common bazaar gossip would be, especially if the queen, the children were dead, the mortality rate was was what it was, and so it was natural that many of the children died. The insinuation would be this lady is into black magic and witchcraft. She's a witch and she's so insecure of her son, and so she's actually got him killed. So including when Ahilyabai's son goes a little, deranged and also later dies, there's a lot of talk that she has done something on him. So this kind of, and Abbakka too, which becomes common parlance. So you have these kind of narratives too, where it was so difficult for people to accept that a woman can be in positions of power. And someone like Nike Devi, whom I mentioned, who had such an important role in the history of India, I would say, because if Ghori had occupied Gujarat then, and the whole of Rajputana, southern Gujarat would have fallen to him at that time. She was the regent queen of an infant boy, Mul Raja II. All her chroniclers, contemporary chroniclers, forget who are now, Ari Simha, Merutunga, Somshekhara, all these people who wrote in Sanskrit and Prakrit and so on, Jain scholars and so on, they don't even give her any credit. They say this infant king was given a toy by the mother, and which was the sword, and just brandishing his sword, he defeated the Hammira and threw him out of the, this one, in the battle of Kasarhada. So the mother's role there is only to give this toy of a sword, and this 5-year-old or 6-year-old was so brave that he actually defeated Muhammad Ghori. And Merutunga, who actually mentions her as the Goa Kadamba princess, the daughter of Paramardin, he goes on to say that the Hammira was so weak that even a lady could defeat him, where the importance of the woman is not there, only because the opponent was so weak, that is why she managed to defeat him. If he was strong, then she would not have managed to defeat. So we have certainly both examples. So that's why I said, when we come with all these modern constructs of patriarchy and feminism and all these things, it's very difficult because for every rule there is an exception. Both ways you can argue, like in law and economics, that you can have counterexamples for both sides to kind of make your case for either things. But by and large, the importance that women and their contributions to the civilization, to the kingdom, to society, that is so underemphasized. Meenakshi ji mentioned about those contributions to by widows and kings, queens. In Gujarat, the Rani Ki Vav that we find, that also is by Rani Udaymati, who was the widow of Bhim Deva, I mean, the Taj Mahal we commemorate as something that, the king's love for the wife and so on. There are examples where the queen built these magnificent, architectural splendors in memory of her husband who had died. The Rani Ki Vav is one such. Similarly, in Ahmedabad, Karnavati, you have the Adalaj Ki Vav. That also is by this Ruda Bai. It's called actually Ruda Bai Ki Vav, which was also built by a lady in memory of the Waghela ruler, her husband, who had died. So, all these numerous examples, they just don't strike a bell. And what an architectural splendor the Rani Ki Vav is. It's after all just a simple well to store water, but then a step well with such intricate carvings and so on, and something as mundane as storing water is also made aesthetically so beautiful, which I think in a way only a woman could conceive of and conceptualize. That is something that unfortunately she is seldom given credit for.
The other underlying theme that some of your heroes have is the relationship with Dharma. At some point, maybe sometimes right from the beginning, or at some point after their conquest, a certain amount of stable rule, they literally consecrate their life to Dharma. They become literally servitors of temples. So Martanda Varma comes to mind. Ahilyabai Holkar's, I think, entire life is that. You have the king of Manipur who you say, you give the entire strain of Vaishnavism being introduced there. So you again touch upon the heroes and tell us about this very fundamental aspect of the relationship the kings had with Dharma, with temples, with spirituality, with maintenance and subsistence to these structures, to these establishments. Yeah.
Along with that, Alu, I think right from Lalitaditya's example.
Yes, of course, my God, how could I forget the Martanda Varma?
Yeah, you have, Meenakshi ji spoke about the Chakravarti Raja who went on a Digvijaya campaign. Digvijaya was, beyond just political conquest and conquering of lands. It was also an intellectual conquest. So everywhere that he went and conquered whoever, Kannauj or other places, he would bring all the scholars from those places to his kingdom. So the importance of your empire was, of course, measured by the amount of palaces, the opulence, the temples and all this you built, but also the intellectual quotient. Today we lack that, where we are only looking at materialistic things to measure success. Are we the 5th largest economy? How fast we are growing? But that is very important. But along with that, what is the intellectual quotient? What is the scholarship? And there, the demonization of those who produce knowledge over the centuries, that has ensured that this is almost like a bad word. So in this, the Digvijaya was done and you became a Chakravarti along with great empires you built. Your empire, your court had to be a seat of learning. And the index of how great you were was a composite, index of all of this. So Vakpati, Bhavabhuti, Atrigupta, all these people were brought from various conquests, Aryabhatta and so on, to the Kashmir court. And Atrigupta, for instance, was the grandfather of Abhinav Gupta, who established the entire Kashmir school of Shaivism. Kashmir became a center of Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism, and Ayurveda, astronomy, all of these things. So that, how intellectually fertile your kingdom was, that was also very, very important. And then the dharmic element as well, where, the Manipur, you mentioned Jai Singh. Now, his ancestor was this man called Pamheba, who was the one who introduced Hinduism in the indigenous communities of Manipur. And it was Jai Singh who united all the Metis indigenous tribes and also brought Vaishnavism. So today we have the Manipuri Ras Leela, you have the Nata Sankirtana that is goes on there as a very important cultural element of Manipur. And in Imphal you have the Sri Govindji temple. Now it's said that constant Burmese incursions into Manipur, he was battling those. He had alliances, matrimonial and others with the Ahoms. So he taken shelter in the Ahom court. And there he has a dream where Krishna is supposed to have come in his dream and said, there is a certain jackfruit tree somewhere, you go cut it and make that into the idols of Krishna, Subhadra, Balbhadra, and then consecrate that in your court, and you will get back your kingdom. And so after coming back from exile, this man goes and cuts that jackfruit, and the consecration is to happen. Quite magically, while the Radha, or the female counterpart of this one is to be sculpted, the jackfruit tree falls short of the wood. And then he does something very strange, which is his 8-year-old daughter, Bimbavati or Lakshmi Priya. He dedicates her as Radha to the Govindji, and she becomes, that name is very complicated, some Manipuri name. That's the new name that she takes on. And through that, so this whole Ras Leela that you see of dance with those round, costumes, and the songs that were composed then, that gave Manipur its cultural element. And the name Manipur itself, a very Sanskritic name, was also given by this man. So that was as important. And in his kingdom, when by chance, a Brahmin priest was punished wrongly and executed, this man is so, sad that under his watch, an injustice has been committed, and so he renounces his kingdom and goes away on penance all the way to Vrindavan, and on the way he dies. Similarly, Marthanda Varma, he is somebody from the small principality called Venad. He creates this entire Travancore kingdom, all the small, Quilon and Elaida Swarupam, all these small principalities he unites and makes Travancore, suppresses all the terrible rebellions that are happening in Travancore by the Pillayars and all these people who are there in the court. And after all this campaign, he dedicates the entire kingdom to Sri Padmanabha Swami and calls himself Padmanabha Dasa. And the king is a trustee. I'm just a trustee. I am carrying out the entire, rule in your name. So, the spiritual element, even when we, not mentioned here, but Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and so on, the spiritual element of that. And that is where I think Bankim Chandra's, verse, and also what Aravindanji rightly mentioned, this whole element of the divine feminine, that Devi, Bhavani, Bharti, as Sri Aurobindo mentions, Chandi in Punjab, Durga in Bengal, Bhavani in Maharashtra, their role in this warrior spirit, and which in turn I think fed into our freedom movement, which fed into the way the violent struggle of the revolutionaries, of which I think Sanjeev must have spoken in depth in the afternoon. That was a very important element. Now, post-independence, particularly since the Hindu element of our existence had to be subsumed, even in the freedom movement, all these elements. Today, a Bankim Chandra would be probably called communal. All these people who took, Shivaji Maharaj, who took an oath on Bhavani's sword that was given to him and so on, they would be communal. So all these elements had to be subsumed, and the freedom movement itself, sanitized to such an extent that these aspects don't come out. But then the long tradition of that goes back to all these different Bravehearts of Bharat, who for whom Dharma, spirituality, and that Kshatriya spirit that came with it was a very, very essential component. We were not an absolute, non-violent or pacifist, civilization or nation.
So my last question in two parts, because I think it's only fair that we finally give the audience a chance to ask questions. It pertains to also the way you write your book. Each story begins with a beautiful legend. Sometimes it is oral tradition, sometimes it is song, sometimes it is almost fantastic. And also, the reason why I'm asking you that is you are a trained historian. So what is the value you see in this sort of inclusion of legend into writing a biography? Because some of it is steeped or anchored in fact. And the reason I'm asking you this is that, when we are going on talking about debunking history and, setting the narratives right, there is a certain lived reality that is lived via these songs, via these legends, via these mythological stories that persist even among the people today.
Yeah.
Whereas in academia, we have this entire debate of writing, setting a narrative, debunking a narrative. And I know that every time there is a controversy about Savarkar, I feel bad for you that you have to keep coming back on TV and again and again and again talking about petition. It's become, so you understand. So how long are we going to be in a setting of debunking? And of at the in the academic level, whereas when we read the stories, there's so much that is still alive within the people. So can you just wind up with that?
Yeah. Before that, I'll just bring one element which I forgot, which was one is, of course, the folk legends and so on.
Yes.
To all those people who say, there was no consciousness of Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism or whatever, uh, right through this unending chain that we see of common resistance that I'm talking of. And when Muhammad Ghazni, goes to Somnath, by then this Bhimdeva, who is the ruler, he has run away. And he has a free run through Patan and goes to Somnath. And there he is so, astonished to see about 50,000 common Hindus who are protecting the temple. And it takes him 3 days to kill all of them. And then he enters the temple. And there too, of course, this unfortunate distortion that is done to mention Somnath, that this was not for theological reasons. Of course, you have the wicked Brahmin who was amassing wealth, and it was a den of all kinds of vices. Recently, there was some nonsense that he found a lot of vices there, and so he came to cleanse.
The same about
Aurangzeb in Kashi. He found, to protect women. That's the silliest thing, where Ghazni had entire this thing of slave trade and sex trade with all the women from Hindustan being taken there. And these people were coming all the way and cleansing our temples where they found all kinds of vices apparently. So, and also eminent historians who keep telling us this, that, it was not at all for this one. Different chroniclers have different versions. Obviously, today if there's an accident that's happened on the road and you ask 10 eyewitnesses, 10 people will tell 10 different things. Finally, did the fellow die or not? That is the ultimate question, which maybe there's a concurrence. But all those chroniclers are unanimous in their accounts that he destroyed the Somnath Shivling. How he did he pierce it in the middle or from the top? That doesn't become a thing to say that he didn't do it. So there too, when he goes there and he, after killing these 50,000 people, he goes and asks these, the priests come running and say, you are a Lutera, so whatever amount of money you want, you take and just leave from this place. He supposed to have laughed, and this is what some of his Al-Baruni, then Farishta, Minhaj-e-Siraj, all these people account it in detail, that he laughs and says, if I do that, my name will be etched in history as a trader of idols. I don't want my name to be known like that. I want to be known as Butch Shikan or a breaker of idols. So all Sikandar Butch Shikan of the Shahmiri dynasty of Kashmir, they took pride in suffixing their name with the title Butch Shikan. That was a common title to all those people who broke as many butts or idols. So in such a case where he says that, and this is accounted first person accounts of their own chroniclers, you have today's fellows saying that this was not for theological purpose, it was only for wealth and all of that. And even after, so let the rulers do what they do. Now after he's going back to Ghazni, the amount of consciousness, the hurt that is there in the minds and souls and psyche of common Hindus, that their important Jyotirlinga was desecrated. When the army is wanting to go back, of course, Bhimdeva comes and makes a re-entry and tries to, attack him from the back. And while he is literally on a retreat, then a few people come posing as guides. and say the army needs water and food and so on. So they say, we'll show you where water is available, and they take him all around the desert and arid regions, and at some point they become suspicious as to where they are leading us, and they catch the guide and ask him to reveal the truth. And finally he says, yes, there is no water body here, and I am actually misleading you and misguiding you, and I wanted to take revenge and ensure your entire army and you die of starvation and thirst. And of course he's sartan se juda after that. But then this common angst, that consciousness, and that remained so many centuries later. So why did Ahilyabai 800, 900 years later, it struck her that these were the important centers she had to renovate. It was something important in the psyche and consciousness of people. It was passed on generation to generation. She consecrated all the 12 Jyotirlingas, renovated them, the Char Dhams, the 7 Puris as mentioned in the Garud Puran. She literally marked the civilizational contours of Bharat, as probably Adi Shankara had done several centuries ago. And few more years later, when that story, of course, has multiple, contestations. When Maharaja Ranjit Singh, it is said, when he made this offensive against Durrani, Zaman Shah in Afghanistan, it is said that he, after defeating him, said, "You give us back the dwars, the silver, gates, which was of Somnath, which was put into Ghazni's mausoleum, the Mazar in Ghazni." And as after being defeated, they had to give those things back. But by then there was no temple there; it was all in ruins and so on. So the people in Gujarat said, "We can't house it," and it was actually made as the darshan dwars of the Golden Temple, the original, this ones that came sandalwood gates with silver. Laden and so on. There are contestations to that. Some say this is, and the Sikh revivalism that we see today, they don't want to associate with the Hindu element of their own Maharajas. That becomes a problem. But still, Ranjit Singh also donated so much of gold to the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir. So why was that happening? All through that consciousness of this wounded civilization, that things have been broken. And I think those who haven't read should read Meenakshi ji's book on the flight of Hindu deities, which is, I think, like, it's a heart-moving account of how resilience was, along with battles, common people transporting idols, moving from one place to the other, hiding it in wells, in lakes, burying it underground. All these things happening all the time. That is how this, the survival has happened due to this indomitable strength of resilience. And that is also lived history. That is also lived experience. But to your question on folklore, one example, because there's not much time, we've all seen Kantara and this whole idea of Bhuta tradition, Bhuta Aradhane. So in coastal Karnataka, most of us in mainstream history textbooks, we may not know about Rani Abbakka. But in coastal Karnataka, in Ullal, in Mangalore, that region, the Bhuta Aradhane that is done invokes not only gods and demigods and spirits, but also ancestors, kings and queens and so on. And Abbakka is invoked in plural form, because there were 4 Abbakkas actually, not 1, but 4, and all of them in their own ways gave resistance to the Portuguese. So they are invoked as Abbakka Deviyaru or Mahadevi. That is the common thing. And this Abbakka spirit comes, and and I was fortunate to see one such performance where the practitioner talks about how we destroyed the Portuguese fleet, and very graphic details and so on. A lot of it is fantastic stories, which is interesting, and like what we discussed, Anand and I, in the morning, of how that storytelling, the fictional element, makes it so interesting and enlivening for all of us. History is not some dead, frozen museum object, but something that lives amidst us. So all these were there. But then for a modern historian, researcher, how do you then triangulate that famous word of triangulation of facts? How do you see, is this all true? That practitioner who's probably illiterate, is he actually telling, is there some kernel of truth, historical truth in that performance? So while I was doing this, there's this Italian, traveler, Pietro della Vel, who comes to India and goes all into different places. He has heard about this entire story of Abbaka in the court of the Persian emperor. And then among other things, he also wants to come and see who is this lady. And the story that was doing the rounds was precisely this, that there was this lady who actually defeated the Portuguese fleet. And how did they do that? When the fleet was parked on the shores of Mangalore, in the night, all the Mapilas, the Mogaviras, all these soldiers of hers, in coconut shells, the ammunition was filled, and these were hurled. Hundreds of coconut, very indigenous ammunition, made and hurled at the Portuguese fleet, and the entire thing caught fire, and all the admirals and captains, everybody was killed. And that news traveled all the way to Persia, and this man heard it, and he, among other places, also comes to Ullal. He calls it some other name in his memoirs. And in his memoirs, there's an account of all of this. There's also an account, he meets her, of course, a colonial glance that he has. He says, this lady, she destroys all my idea of what a queen should be. She's so dark and corpulent and very, very unprincely. There's no upper garment also on her body. She's walking like that only in the bazaars with no fanfare and so on. But then there is, as I said, that kernel of truth of this actually happening. Maybe the exaggeration of the folk performance may not match 100% with what the historical truth is, but there is some element of truth in these stories. In fact, in Kannada, there is a very famous saying that the Vedas can go wrong, but the proverbs, which are lived histories, they can never go wrong. So, that is the amount of importance given to oral traditions. So, I think oral traditions, folklore, they become very, very important crutches for modern historians to reconstruct the story when mainstream chronicling, mainstream documentation ignores and excises many of these great men and women.
Questions?
I'm glad there are two women in the... Yes, it's on.
Thank you for a very enlightening session. Just wanted to tell you, it's very interesting you're talking about Abakka Chauta and the traditions in Ullal, because for Durgavati also, the Gonds have turned her into a goddess.
Yes.
So it's the same, I think there is some kind of, so do you know of other examples like this, where the queen becomes, mythologized into a celestial being?
I think one that comes, even Lakshmi Bai, the manner in which she is among the Bundelas and so on in Bundelkhand, I think she's to quite an extent, may not be as a goddess, but I think in folklore she's given a lot more importance than what she actually was. Ahilya Bai for sure, Punya Shlok and the entire Indore airport named after her. There are, and the maternal concern that she had for the kingdom, which I think was very important when we talk of leadership models too. Here was a maternal instinct of this lady that what good governance and leadership needs to be, where not only the human being, even for the human beings in the summer months, there would be people who would be stationed on footpaths to give water to the poor and needy. In the winters, there would be people who would give bedding and blankets and warm wear. Not only human beings, but also dogs and cats and stray animals. For them, there would be pots of water and food kept in different parts of Indore. The Narmada Ghats, where she would go for a ritual, bath every morning, there was specific amount of food kept aside for the fish which were there in the river. So a ruler, what a good ruler needs to be, not just look after the human beings in the kingdom, but you are a mother for the entire, all the living beings. I think that element is what makes them deified to the extent that they are, and rightly so. Yes.
Anand wants to ask a question.
I think the lady, after that, I'm very scared of that man. So.
Only 30 seconds.
10 seconds, yeah. She'll take only 10. Your strategy back at you.
What, according to you, led to this much of whitewashing of our history? One thing. Second question, you talked about Koili in your book.
Yes.
And there are some sources which say Koili is a fictional character. Did you really get some material evidence that she was a true character?
Yes, there is. In the British accounts itself, there is a very small mention of this lady. So Kuili is this character, I'm sure in Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry, there's no need to say much about that. But the first suicide bomber, so to say, where she douses herself with kerosene. She was a part of the women corps of Velu Nachiyar. And to regain Shivaganga on the day of Vijayadashmi, when all these women are going there and ostensibly as devotees to worship at the Rajarajeshwari Koil there. She goes inside and douses herself with kerosene, enters the ammunition center and sets herself on fire, and the whole, the Shastra Bhandar is destroyed. And that is how these women then remove their, swords with vetrivel, slogans, and then enter this one. So there is an account of that in the British documents, and very fleetingly, even in the Arcot, chronicles about. They don't mention the name. Maybe that way she may be fictional, but there was some woman who did things like this is certainly mentioned. What was the first question? Why whitewashing happened, I think the way Meenakshi ji ended her this thing, and then we had the Marxist historians, and the rest is history.
Yeah, hi Vikram.
Yes.
Just a small question. One thing about whitewashing, which I won't ask because plenty has been said about it, and you're absolutely right, the audience is as well. But I put to you, it is amazing the pride with which you have narrated what our ancestors did and achieved. And I must say that pride got transmitted to the readers as well. I took pride in reading what our ancestors did. But here is the thing. This will last only till such time that we are Hindus. We aren't converted, So I put to you, brainwashing is one thing, whitewashing of history is another. But this history, writing it and reading it, will only remain till such time we are Hindus. Don't you think so?
Completely agree. I completely agree. And your question, therefore, is what is the solution to that? I wish.
My question is, why do only Hindus amongst Indians take pride in our ancestors?
Which is the saddest part, I think. And I know we were having this discussion last evening also. It sometimes seems like a lost cause, but I keep hammering that much at the peril of a lot of people on this side of the, ideological divide too. Can we, in some manner, de-hyphenate communities of today, particularly, say, the Muslim community, and elements of those who take pride in what the atrocities and associate with the invader. And there are politicians who go to the mazar of Aurangzeb and pay their obeisances, whereas the man was a monster who doesn't even deserve a mazar. So can we, in some way, keep hammering that version, that can we de-hyphenate all of you? They are not your icons, they are not your heroes. Your ancestors suffered at the hands of these people as much as the ancestors of the Hindus. Yours converted, none of them have come in from, Iran or anywhere else, Central Asia. They've all been people of this land itself. Their ancestors, for various reasons, either they could not resist or it was such coercion that they had to convert. So I think the Indonesian model in some ways, where you can be a Muslim nation, but the Hindu culture there, where Ram Leela is performed even by a Muslim majority country, where there are icons of Hinduism there, where they all say we trace our ancestry to that. We may by faith be something else. I don't know. I'm probably a champion for lost causes, but there's no harm trying that rather than push even the very thin and probably the minuscule minority among the minorities who are probably what we can call moderate, and also let them consolidate against a larger bloc. I don't know, it may be a lost cause, but certainly worth, I think, trying to ensure. Can we build that narrative instead? That don't take pride in these characters, Ghazni, Ghori. While we say today's Muslims are not responsible for all the atrocities, don't make today's people associate or idolize. And we have ruled over you for 800 years. Give us the army for half an hour, and we'll show you what it is. And these kind of statements. I think that if we can somehow get rid of that, I know it's, as I said, it's a lost cause, but certainly worth trying. But Meenakshi ji always has the last word.
Just one thing I want to add. You said if they can accept their Hindu ancestry, that seems absolutely impossible. I'm just giving you an example that in 1911, the census was done in Bengal. All right. Out of 21 million Muslims, 19 million said we have come from outside, whereas the number was actually just the opposite. They were all locals who had converted, but they said, no, we have come from outside. So that gives you an idea of the challenges.
No, of course, it's as I said, I predated it saying that it's a lost cause. But what is the solution then? I mean, Dr. Ambedkar, then are we living on a tinderbox, waiting to explode at any time? Then that's not even a solution. Dr. Ambedkar had probably rightly postulated that in 1947 there must be a complete transfer of populations, which has not happened. It is a very integral and an important part of society. So at the maximum, if whitewash and brainwash has happened to the Hindu psyche and Hindu mind for so many decades after independence, this is normal wash, not even whitewash. Can we try with some elements of those side to ensure that there is some crossover? As I said, it's an experiment worth trying, but that is the next, only last option that one has. Because history also thereby has when we constantly demonize and do this, in 1937, I think history has that important lesson also, that the Muslim League was at the brink of disaster, breaking up. There were so many protests. The manner in which they were pushed to the wall by Nehru after the 1937 elections, when governments were to be formed in the United Provinces, and Muslim League wanted to ally with the Congress, but these things were spurred, saying, you join the Congress. So when that community is pushed to the wall, they regroup and come back with a added, power and vengeance. And that detriment that it did to the subcontinent, we all know. So do we want to do something similar where we can, alienate to the extent that there is being pushed to the wall, there is another consolidation, another division, another bloodbath? I don't know. As I said, that's why, I mean, many people have, had problems saying, how can Chand Bibi be a part of this? How can Hazrat Mahal? So why don't we say that these are your icons? Why don't we say a Rahim, a Ras Khan, a Shishunal Sharifa, or, APJ Abdul Kalam, or Arif Muhammad Khan? These people can be your icons rather than Aurangzeb and Tipu and all these people. To make icons of, you need to whitewash them. So as I said, this is the success of this experiment. I can certainly not guarantee. Maybe it will be a failure, but it is certainly worth trying rather than the other very dangerous alternative, which will, God forbid, see another repetition of 1947.
So,
Sorry, it was a very somber note to end on.
No. With that, we conclude this session. But Vikram, probably it's not just they accepting their right heroes. The day a Muslim historian of your caliber will include Hindu heroes in their list of heroes, maybe that day it will be. It's not just them accepting the right, just like you did with Chand Bibi and Hazrat Mahal. That will be the day. So with that, we conclude this session and this day.